Hey listeners, thanks for dropping in. I'm Christy.
And I'm Melissa. And this is Buried Motives, where we dig deep into the details of some of the most gruesome
dirtbag murderers. Hey listeners.
Welcome back to Buried Motives.
Thank you for joining us.
We are glad that you're here with us today. And we are going to talk about some baseball. What's more fitting for the 4th of July than baseball?
That's pretty American, I think.
Yeah. Now that hockey's died down at our house, we're enjoying being at the baseball field. It's nice to be outside and not stuck away in a cold arena. And recently, our oldest has hit a streak of home runs. He was hitting one almost every game.
That's amazing.
Yeah, he was completely in the zone. That place where all the great athletes go to make the magic happen. Do you ever remember as a kid pretending to be the hero of the game? Some great athlete that was going to make all the fates align to make your team victorious?
No.
Come on.
I had other dreams, but not that.
You and I were so different.
I did dream when I was at the lake that I was a mermaid. Does that help?
No.
Or that I was a superhero, but I don't think I ever dreamt that I needed to be the hero of a sports game. I can pretty much, with 100% certainty, say that.
Really? I was so sporty growing up, or at least I thought I was sporty. I remember when I was 11, and it was 2 weeks after my appendix ruptured, and I convinced my mom that I was perfectly fine and I could go play fastball. It was okay to do. I had envisioned in my head that the team just needed me, and I was going to be the star of the game.
Well, you're the star of this show, so...
Not quite. And that game didn't go quite as well as I had envisioned in my head either.
Well, I wouldn't think so after 2 weeks of just having an organ taken out of your body.
But I have always been a daydreamer like that. When I hit the volleyball court, man, I'm going to be the star. One of the dirtbags we're going to talk about today, though, was a daydreamer too. And she envisioned herself playing along with the greats. On June 1st, 2018, when Carolee Sharrow entered Goodall Park in Stamford, Maine, she was dreaming about playing with the greats. As she rounded the bases, she was playing with the great Babe Ruth.
In her mind, she was playing with Babe Ruth.
Yes.
Okay.
Because Babe Ruth lived a few years before 2018.
Right.
Like 100 years before. But Goodall Park is the historic baseball field where Babe Ruth played an exhibition game and hit a game-winning 3-run homer that is said to have traveled a whopping 700 feet through a local candy store window.
Whoa.
Yeah. That hit had been in 1919, and it was the last season that he played for the Boston Red Sox.
So he went out with a bang.
He did. And his legend in that field still continues today. When he was traded to the New York Yankees after that season, many believe that he had left a curse behind. The curse of the Bambino that prevented the team from having any real success for 86 years after that.
No way.
Mm-hmm. Unlike the Yankees, who would go on to pick up 26 World Series titles.
So it was all Babe Ruth.
Yeah.
He was the magic.
He didn't play for 86 years, though.
That's true, but it was his little magic that kept it going.
Right. It's funny how superstitious sports fans can be, but they really thought that he had cursed them when he left.
How good would that feel to be Babe Ruth? And after you leave, it just all crumbles.
So sad.
Like, it was me. It was all me.
Well, they won the year that he left, but then after that, it was all downhill. For 86 years, that's a long drought.
That is a long time.
Yeah. Regardless of the curse on the stadium, Babe remained a legend in people's eyes, and many still flocked to that stadium where he made the legendary hit. Players would stand at the plate in the same spot where he stood and channel his essence and envision their own hit balls flying over the field, hearing the crowds cheer their name as they rounded the bases. Unlike the Little Leaguers that were playing that Friday night, though, Carol wasn't running the bases. She was driving them. Just minutes before she crashed her car through the gates of the park and burned out onto the field, people had heard screaming tires in the street just outside the ballpark. When they heard the next screech, it was clear that it was coming from the parking lot. But most assumed that it was just some local teenagers goofing around. It was a beautiful summer night.
That is wild. Yeah, you would think it was some teenagers burning donuts in the parking lot.
The fans inside the park didn't know that just outside the gates in the alley that led out onto the field, Carol was screaming at Sean Young to open the gate. Sean was playing in the alley with his 4-year-old at the time. The alley is that break in the stadium seats that allow people to enter the field directly. Can you envision it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I know enough to envision that. Yep.
Okay.
Melissa loves me, even though I don't know sports.
And Christy loves me, even though I love sports.
True.
This alley was the perfect spot to let little kids run around and play while the game was on. It was a sheltered area, and any parents that came down to supervise their kids could still watch the game from the sideline. Parents that didn't come down to watch their little ones could see them from above and keep an eye on everything that was going on. That evening, Sean refused to let Carol through. Cars weren't supposed to be in the alley, let alone on the field when a game was going on. Sean was disturbed by Carol's appearance and behavior. It was clear that Carol was agitated. She was screaming obscenities, talking to herself, and she was in a disheveled state. Her auburn hair was frizzy and going every which way. What happened next could be heard from inside the stadium. It was the distinct sound of a car revving, followed by the smell of burning rubber as Carol plowed her maroon Civic through the gate of Goodall Park, leaving a trail of smoke in her wake. Sean had grabbed his son and put him up on a small wall, narrowly escaping the pathway of the car. Carol hadn't been focused on him, and he was able to squish himself to the side.
Oh my goodness.
He tried to run after the car, but fell and struggled to get up. And at the time, he didn't realize that he'd actually torn his quad muscle trying to get out of the way of the car.
Oh.
Carol drove her car at third base, only swerving at the last minute to miss players, coaches, and umpires.
So the field is full of little kids.
Yeah, 13 and 14-year-olds were supposed to be playing a doubleheader that night.
Oh my goodness.
The people on the field were fleeing in every direction. Players were climbing over the dugouts to get out of the field. Others, in the safety of the stands, still climbed higher just to try to get as far away as possible. Some recognized Carol as she drove crazily around the field. She was a local from Sanford. She was the nice woman that had checked them out at Lowe's, or she was the woman that had cared for their elderly grandmother. Carol rounded second base and then first base and headed for home. At home plate, she turned the car right, driving over the pitcher's mound, and aimed it for another gate across from the stands. Carol hit this service gate hard enough that the car bounced back from the force and had the gate's bars imprinted into the front grille of the car.
Holy cow.
But the gate had held, so she reversed and headed back for the main gate into the field. This one led out into the parking lot, and then straight into Benton Playground, where other children were playing ball.
She was targeting children, wanting to injure them?
She was driving erratically all over the place, but she was actually rounding the bases.
Yeah, she did a reverse home run.
In her car.
That's cheating, Carol.
Yeah.
That's not, I know enough to know that's not how you play.
Not in your car.
No.
And not backwards.
You and I know that.
But at the gate, 68-year-old Douglas Parkhurst was there shooing kids to safety. And then he and another man, Mark Stewart, decided that they would close the gate. Mark later told a local news station that they were just trying to close the gate to stop her from getting to the other ballpark where smaller children were playing. Between the two parks, it was estimated that there were over 200 people in attendance.
Oh.
Douglas had been at the field that day watching his grandson Carson play. That game was in the 7th inning, and the home team was just switching out their pitcher as they battled back from a deficit. The new pitcher was just about to throw his first pitch when the car crashed through the gates. Douglas told Cameron's mom, Donna, that he needed to go down and help, saying, "I need to protect the children." That's when he came face to face with Carol. Carol in the parking lot previously had avoided the crowded areas, the ticket windows, and the concession stand. And on the field, as she had rounded the bases, she had always turned away at the last minute when she got close to someone. But it was completely different with Douglas. Witnesses say that she aimed her car right at him and never wavered once. The Civic was described as a bullet with his name on it. Carol hit Douglas with such force that his body was sent flying into the air, and it landed 40 feet away. A witness said that he saw Douglas's shoe fly up to the top stands where onlookers watched horrified.
Oh.
Police and emergency personnel from the Sanford Fire Department responded quickly to the multiple 911 calls that were made, but they wouldn't be able to save the grandfather. Douglas died en route to Southern Maine Healthcare Center in a medevac. His elderly body had been no match for the 3,000-pound car.
Yeah, no kidding.
Carol fled from the park at 50 miles per hour, not hitting the brakes once. No one could quite wrap their heads around what had happened. To some, it was a relief that it had been Douglas, someone who had lived a greater portion of his life than one of the kids that had been on the field.
Well, and it just seems so bizarre that if you are targeting this elderly man, why are you going to put all these children in danger?
No, it didn't make any sense at all what had happened.
No, 68 is not that old, but when you're comparing that to a child,
it's a lot more life.
Yeah.
To others who had been on the field, there was survivor guilt. It was hard to understand why Douglas had been hit when they hadn't. Clint Howard had been on the field acting as the first base ump when the car entered the field. He had bravely stood his ground and waved his arms at Carol's car, trying to draw her attention away from the children that were running away. He was so sure that she was going to hit him that he had the thought that this was a strange way to die.
Oh.
But then at the last minute, Carol had turned away from him and set her sights directly on Douglas.
So he was definitely her target.
It did look like that. Clint later wondered why it had been Douglas and not him. When Clint's son found out about what had happened at the ball game, he later made the comment to his dad that, quote, "The devil was out collecting souls tonight," trying to comfort his dad by saying that there must be some reason why things had happened the way they did.
And how traumatic for all of these children to watch this man die this way.
Oh, it would have been awful.
Yes.
That morning, Carol had gotten up early. She was supposed to be on her way to New Hampshire to meet her daughter Jenna and look at her wedding venue. It was a big day, and Carol didn't handle big days well. Carol was the fifth of 5 children in her family. Her parents, Bob and Fran Dupuis, had been high school sweethearts and had raised their children in Somersworth, New Hampshire. Well, mostly. Bob was a master sergeant in the U.S. Army, and so the family was occasionally stationed overseas. It sounded like the longest period of time had been spent in Germany. But later, he worked as a National Guard for 7 years. This posting allowed the family to return to New Hampshire, and the stability was a blessing for Carol, but it wouldn't completely stave off what she was destined for. In 1987, when she was 18, Carol had had a split from reality and was diagnosed with bipolar type 1. This type of bipolar is known for its manic episodes that can last up to a week long.
Ooh.
During these periods, Carol would be extremely agitated with high levels of physical and emotional energy. During a manic phase, Carol's persona would change, and she would have extreme changes in her emotion, her energy levels, and her thought processes. Hallucinations and delusions were also a part of Carol's illness. Not Carol, but the illness. But even though it wasn't who Carol really was, relationships with her were difficult to maintain, especially with those who loved her most. When Carol drank, the mania would be triggered, and she had been charged multiple times with drinking and driving. During a bipolar episode, she made very poor decisions. It seemed like Carol had been in a manic episode when her marriage to Kirk Sharrow ended, and Carol had given up custody of her daughter Jenna. After an initial rocky period of hurt and frustration, Carol and Kirk did learn how to get along for the sake of their daughter. And Carol remained a part of Jenna's life, even though she moved to Maine. Now at 51, Carol was fairly good at managing her disease as long as she kept her routines and took her lithium. Keeping the same sleep, exercise, eating patterns, and activities were important for Carol. They helped her stay level. Carol regularly met with her doctor to monitor her lithium levels and her illness. And for the most part, she had been functioning fairly well since her last big breakdown, which had happened at Jenna's graduation.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it sounded pretty awful for her daughter. Big events were just triggers for her. And so was the weather. And so this June day, the humidity was really high, and that was a trigger for her. She had hair that really responded to humidity. It was almost like that was just too much external stimulus for her when it got really frizzy.
Okay. Any of us girls with naturally curly hair, you can relate.
Yeah.
But this is an extreme. And you said she was checking out wedding venues too, which is a big event.
It is a big event and super emotional.
Yes.
When Jenna spoke to her mom that morning, Carol was happy and excited. It was a warning sign for Jenna, though, but one that was brushed aside because it was supposed to be a happy and exciting day.
Mm-hmm.
But she knew that being overly excited about something would set her mom off. So she kind of put it in the back of her mind.
Right.
That morning on June 1st, Carol climbed into her car, and instead of heading to the wedding venue, she headed to Goodall Park. It was just around the corner from her house, and it was a place of familiarity for her. She had watched baseball there, and in the park across the road, she had played basketball. So she was familiar with both of those parks.
Right.
That morning, she nosed her car right up to the gate a little before 8 a.m. and watched the grounds crew get the field ready for the game that was planned for later that night. The grounds crew recognized Carol, and they could see that she was agitated, angrily talking to herself. This was such a contrast with how she was with Jenna that day.
Yeah, it's not adding up how you're leaving your home to go spend the day with your daughter doing wedding plans, and you end up causing this mass hysteria and murdering a man.
Right, but her moods were just in a full 360 spin. They were all over the place. And they just continued to circle and get worse as the day progressed. The meeting with her daughter was completely forgotten about. She visited different places that were familiar to her throughout the day and was noticed to be agitated at almost all of them. When she fled from the baseball diamond that night and was found later at her apartment, she was still manic and not aware of reality when the police found her.
So did she even comprehend that she had killed a person? Because just going back to your house and waiting for police does not seem like a wise decision if you're trying to be a dirtbag.
No, she didn't know at all. When the police showed up, she was sporting her Red Sox t-shirt and asked the officer if she could bum a cigarette, clearly not grasping the severity of what she had done. She was familiar with the officer because he had helped her before. She was a well-known individual to police. Not because she was in any particular trouble, but just they knew her.
They knew of her situation.
Yeah. And this police officer was aware right away that she was having an episode. That became even clearer when she told him that she was playing ball that night with Babe Ruth. She also told the officer that she was a Navy SEAL and that she was friends with Tom Brady. Her stories didn't even flow with one another as she skipped through different decades. After about 20 minutes of questioning, the officer was alerted that Douglas had died in the medevac. That's when he had to arrest Carol, and she was completely taken off guard by this.
That would actually be a horrible realization for her.
She didn't realize anything that was happening. She asked the officer what for, and then tried to tell him that she was cool. Like, we're cool, man. It's okay. You don't need to do this. When he cuffed her, she didn't resist. She just got in the car with him. The next morning, the spirit of the town came out in full force to support the Little League team that once again took the field to finish their doubleheader.
They played the next day?
They did.
They were a bunch of little Melissas after getting her appendix out. The game must go on. Wow.
There's the spirit of the game, Christy.
Oh, I get that.
You just can't knock it down. On the field, there was lots of talk about the crazy and tragic events that had transpired the night before.
There was probably still tire marks on the field.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness.
They interviewed children about going back, and some of them were scared, and others felt like they just wanted to go back to life the way it was supposed to be. They talked about the undying spirit of the game that brought them all together, and the man that had been deemed a hero, pushing children out of the way and taking the full force of the car himself. Little Leagues around Maine posted messages on their Facebook pages saying things like, quote, "We want to share our heartfelt gratitude that physically all the players from the Babe Ruth Little League are safe, and our deepest sorrow for the family of the brave man that gave his life protecting others." Douglas Eugene Parkhurst was 68 when he died. He had been born on April 27, 1950, and he was the youngest of 6 children born to a long line of farmers in New York around the Fulton area. Ora and Varney Parkhurst raised their 4 boys and 2 girls in a busy household. Douglas as a child got along well with his siblings despite the age gap. There was quite a significant one, almost 20 years, between his oldest brother and him.
Oh, wow.
He was described as a quiet and shy boy. As a teen, he and his brothers worked at odd jobs together, and like most teenage boys, he had a love for fast cars. That love didn't even fade when his oldest brother died in a gruesome car accident in 1968. He was the passenger of a single car accident, and Jack, his oldest brother, had to be identified by his hands because there was so much facial trauma because the crash was so severe.
Oh, that's horrific.
Yeah. After the crash, Douglas had started to drink a little bit more than normal. It didn't sound like it was full-blown alcoholism, but definitely more than social drinking.
He was binging.
Mm-hmm. Less than a year later, Douglas, at the age of 19, entered the Air Force in 1969 and was stationed in Vietnam in 1970, serving as a cook. When he returned, he married a woman named Anne. She was a few years younger than Douglas, but she was completely smitten with this tortured soul that had returned after the war. He drank heavily and had constant nightmares. Anne seemed to understand him like no other, though, and he loved her back. The couple went on to have 3 boys of their own, and each would say that their father was a hard man. Anne worked as a nurse's assistant and always defended Douglas's coldness to her children. She was always adamant that they never talked to him about the war. Douglas was not a warm and fuzzy father type. Quite the opposite. Others outside of the family would say that Douglas was a kind man, always willing to help, but still not an overly warm one. To his boys, he was super strict and demanding, never giving an inch. Douglas was abusive towards his sons from the time that they were very small, and rarely, if ever, displayed any affection towards them. When he wasn't disciplining them or berating them, He just wasn't around. When Anne passed away in 1996, the relationship with his children was very tense. Douglas kept mostly to himself after that. When his grandchildren started to come around, he stopped drinking, and he did make a little bit more of an effort with them, most of them. There was a particularly strained relationship with his oldest son, Douglas Jr., and that created a palpable tension with his son and with his grandson, Douglas III. It's unknown if this was the reason why Douglas was standoffish towards that grandson that was his namesake, or if it was just kind of how it was. But it was something that his grandson felt he just didn't understand. He didn't know why the relationship was so tense and why his father and his grandfather just couldn't get along. Douglas did develop a very special bond with his only granddaughter. He adored her and cherished her. Just prior to his death, he had given his granddaughter a Mustang GT, like his own black Mustang.
What?
His love of cars had never faded, and he wanted to share that with her.
But when you do something like that for one grandchild, you have to do that for all.
Well, people let him know that, and so Douglas had planned to get his 2 other grandsons' vehicles as well.
Just not Douglas the third.
That's right.
Oh, yeah, that's not cool.
Mm-hmm.
That's a dirtbag move as a grandpa.
Yeah, that's not fair. He had picked out this really souped-up muscle car for his 19-year-old grandson, but then he got kind of talked out of it, and that day of the baseball game, he had purchased his 19-year-old grandson an Altima instead, which people thought was a lot more reasonable of a car. But he gave his granddaughter like this beautiful Mustang.
Ow.
That was the day of the game. Douglas had been doing a lot of purchasing lately and spending time thinking about what he was going to leave behind because he had recently learned that his cancer that he had beaten twice before was back, but this time it was inoperable. Douglas lived in constant pain and found walking and moving difficult. He had suffered a severe back injury years before as an industrial painter, and the cancer being back just made life more difficult. Just shortly before he died, Douglas had told a friend that he was ready for death, saying, quote, "I'm ready to go home." Some people guess that this is why Douglas had been so willing that day to leave his seat on the top of the bleachers, why he had been so willing to put himself in the direct path of Carol's car. But that was only some people. His son Douglas Jr. had another theory subconsciously, and it slipped out when police knocked on his door to tell him that his father had died. Based on what I've learned from the relationship between Douglas and his son Doug Jr., it didn't seem as a big shocker that he appeared indifferent when police told him that his father died.
That's a really strained relationship.
It seemed like it was a super strained relationship. But it did shock police when Doug Jr. asked if the woman running over his father had anything to do with what happened back in New York.
What?
Yeah. Doug Jr. could see fate at work in what had just happened to his father. 50 years earlier, on October 31st, 1968, 15-year-old Darlene Ashby and her 13-year-old cousin Sharrow and her little 4-year-old sister Carolee were making their way home from Victoria Market in Fulton, New York around 6:25 p.m.
Sorry, did you say Carol?
Carolee.
Okay. So this is Carol. Is
no,
it?
It's Carolee.
Okay, so it's not the same girl.
It's not the same
Okay,
girl.
never
No,
mind.
but they do have very similar names.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
The trio had gone out to get birthday candles for Darlene's cake at the insistence of Carolee, who just couldn't imagine her sister not having candles on her birthday cake.
Aw, and it was Halloween.
Yes, and Darlene's 15th birthday. On the way back home, they talked about going out trick-or-treating after eating cake. As they made their way back home, walking along Division Street, they crossed Highway 57. It's a busier road, but there were no stop signs or crosswalks, so the three made their way across cautiously, but they had done it many times before. Cheryl darted across the street first, but Darlene, who was holding Carolee's hand, was a little slower. The 4-year-old was holding a vanilla ice cream cone that her sister had purchased for her. She was completely engrossed in her ice cream cone, so the pair only made it to the white center line before they had to stop and wait for a car coming from the north. Their arms had been stretched out as they walked across the road, but they were still holding hands. Then, in the blink of an eye and a tugging feeling, they were no longer holding hands.
Oh, no.
Darlene watched the horror on her cousin's face erupt as her brain tried to catch up to what the absence of Carolee's hand meant. Carolee had been struck by the passing car, and now her body was 133 feet north on the opposite side of the road. Her ice cream cone lay upside down as a morbid place marker to where she had been just standing.
That's horrible.
It is awful. Could you imagine?
No.
Just somebody gone in just an instant.
No, I cannot. Literally walking them across the street, holding their hand, and in a second, they're gone.
Mm-hmm. I have to show you a picture of Carolee because she is the cutest little.
And she was 4.
She was 4.
Oh.
Isn't she the most angelic little thing you've ever saw?
She's a dolly.
Yeah.
She looks like a little doll.
She is so sweet. One of her beloved black boots that she insisted on wearing everywhere was 65 feet in the other direction.
They hit her hard.
Mm-hmm. The light-colored car that hit her didn't stop. It didn't even hit the brakes as Darlene screamed after it. A passing motorist saw the hit and run and at first thought that it was a stuffed animal that they had seen flying into the dark night sky. When he realized that it was a child, he chased after the car and was able to record a partial license plate. Carolee died that night in the cold street. Police arrived at the scene and an investigation was started. Unfortunately, it would be a very poor one. Few photos were taken, not even with a police camera, but with a bystander's camera. And the family collected things from the scene that they would then turn over to the police weeks after the tragedy had occurred. And there were obvious holes in questioning and investigation that were identified by cold case detectives decades later. Police did set up a roadblock that night and interviewed hundreds of people and alerted neighboring communities to be on the lookout for vehicles with front-end damage. They received differing reports of the make and the color of the car that had hit Carolee. Some said dark, others said gold, and others said white. The inconsistencies led to a very broad search of essentially a guy driving a car.
Oh my goodness. I would think you could trust the person who followed him and got the partial plate.
Mm-hmm.
Because they would have been fixated on that car.
Yeah, but there was a delay in him following that car.
Oh.
Because he had originally thought that it was just a teddy bear, and it wasn't until he actually got up to the scene that he realized it was a little girl. And then he took after the car. Evidence collected at the crime scene didn't seem to narrow it down any further. Police collected random paint chips at the scene and on Carolee in order to help them identify the car. A green paint chip was found in an evidence bag that had held Carolee's blue corduroy pants. Gold paint chips were found on the stretcher that moved Carolee's broken body from the scene. And a tan paint chip was found in the red hood of Carolee's sweater. It was the beloved sweater that she always wore, pretending that she was Little Red Riding Hood.
This is heartbreaking.
It's so sad. Police even thought they had collected brown paint chips. But when these were examined closer, they turned out to be just leaves. But they were just collecting random stuff.
Oh, for sure.
From all of their questioning, police received the news that Douglas's tan 62 Buick Special had recently been in a car accident and that he had been crying about it on Halloween night. When they went to question the 18-year-old, police learned that he and his brother Lenny had taken off hunting and they weren't expected back for a few days. Their brother Larry tells police that his 2 brothers had left his house Halloween night and they had been drinking at the time. They had asked him if he had wanted to go hunting with them, but he had declined because his wife was just about to have their next baby. Police send their brother Larry out to get them, and he returns with them. Police question Douglas for 2 hours about the supposed accident that he was in and how he got the damage on his car to the left front fender. He tells them that he hit a guardrail, but police reports reveal that they found this suspicious and that they didn't think it matched up with the dent on his car. Police pointed out the inconsistencies to him, but unfortunately that seems to be where the questioning stopped. Douglas got lost in all of the other suspects and vehicles that the police were following up on.
What?
Yeah, that's just where the police reports end. They're like, we think that this guy's lying. The dent on his car does not match the guardrail that he says he hit.
Yeah, what did they need? A fluorescent glowing sign pointing with an arrow to him?
They just stopped.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that was bad police work.
Mm-hmm.
They just wrote it down in a file and forgot about it?
It almost seems that way. They were just following up on so many different people.
Yeah, but how many cars did they find that matched the paint color from the chips that they found that got in an accident on Halloween night?
There actually were several. Police that night took Darlene to a prominent businessman's address to compare the taillights of his vehicle to the taillights that she had seen fleeing the scene, and she had felt that they matched. Apparently, this businessman's son was a well-known troublemaker, and so they were focused on him. Police also checked out a boy that had stolen and crashed his aunt's white Pontiac that night. He was reported to be acting very odd after the hit and run. They followed up on a soldier who had gotten his car repaired and repainted right after. And a repair shop worker from the area had also fled the town so quickly after that night that he didn't collect several months of pay. There were also 2 boys that were crying at a diner after the accident and fled when police showed up to question them.
What is going on with all these guys in that town?
There was just a whole bunch going on. And so they were following all of these leads. And it sounds like Douglas's lead got left in the pile.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
They also followed up on the eyewitness that said he had followed the car and got a partial license plate, but it wasn't a complete match to anything that they found with any of the other ones. In all of these leads and follow-ups, Douglas was lost in the mix until 2012.
Wow. So how many years later is that?
It was 44 years later.
Wow.
Later, when the case was reopened, there were numerous excuses given why the investigation had failed. Officers weren't properly trained, investigative techniques were not as advanced at the time, and they admitted that police officers got private donations from citizens, and evidence rooms were never locked at the time. Over the years, the cold case was periodically looked at, but it would be 44 years of Carolee's family having no answers, and it devastated them. Carolee had been a special girl that eluded a light wherever she went. Friends and neighbors would just randomly drop off gifts for this little girl just to see her infectious smile. Her older siblings, even though they were quite a few years older, never complained about having the preschooler around or having to take care of her because she was such a pleasure. She was affectionately called Tonk by her father, George. After her death, he would take trinkets to her grave and at times spend all night there watching over and protecting them because he thought that people would steal them. He would tell his family that he just missed his little Tonk so much. Marlene, Carolee's mother, had become obsessed to find the answers that the police hadn't. She was convinced that the businessman's son had something to do with Carolee's death and that police were somehow covering it up. Her youngest son's life became shrouded in conspiracy theories and haunting stories of the sister that was killed before he was ever born. And for Darlene, her birthday never came without tears and feelings of guilt and regret.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
For all of them, it wasn't just that Carolee had been killed in such a horrible accident. They said that they could accept that accidents happen. What they struggled to deal with was that the driver had never stopped, that Carolee had been left on the road like a piece of garbage.
It's true. You would feel that way.
Yeah.
Like they didn't even care about what they did. They're not coming forward. And now they're free to do it again. And to live their lousy little life.
It's just a dirtbag, right?
It is. Like you said, accidents can happen, but come on.
Right. But Carol hadn't recognized what she did either.
So was he in a bipolar state?
No, he wasn't.
No.
And there's lots of speculation to whether Douglas was completely aware of what he hit or if he wasn't. In 2012, a retired officer started looking into the case again. It just had bothered him so much. In a complete shot in the dark, he made a Facebook post about the cold case and asked anyone that might know something to come forward. 44 years after she had been hit, someone did come forward. Ruby Maxim saw the post and reached out to Darlene and told her that she thought she might have some information that could help. She now lived in Florida, but when she was a teen, she had lived in Fulton. She had known the Parkhursts, and she had known about her sister's death. Her aunt had been friends with Douglas's sister, and shortly after Halloween, 1968, Douglas's sister had asked Ruby if she would say that she was with her two brothers that night. Douglas's sister explained that they had been in an accident that night and that police were asking questions. She said that Douglas had been crying a lot and having nightmares, and she wanted to protect her brother.
So the family's helping to cover it up.
It wasn't really made clear if his sister actually believed he hit the Ashby girl or if he had just been in an accident and didn't want him to get drawn into it. Because around the town, it was largely believed that it was this businessman's son that had done it.
Right.
And so it almost sounded like his sister was trying to, can you just tell them that you were with them so that they don't get drawn into all of this craziness? He was in an accident, but this wasn't the accident.
But it makes sense now why he was so miserable. He held on to this his whole life. And it also makes sense why he doted on his granddaughter.
Yes. And was so hard on his sons.
It was all out of guilt and his own shame.
Yeah. Ruby said she refused to provide an alibi, and later she had come to find out that Lenny had also suffered from nightmares that led to a lot of drinking. Ruby said that she had once asked Lenny about that night, and to her surprise, he admitted to her that they had been the ones that hit Carolee. He said that they had been up all night the night before and that they had been drinking. He told her that they had gotten rid of the car soon afterwards, and that he would even be willing to show it to her if she wanted to see it. Ruby said she declined that offer because she was afraid that if she went out to see the car, she would not come back.
Oh, yeah. Smart girl.
She kept her mouth shut for 4 decades. At first, she said it was just what you did back then. You minded your own business. But later, she said it became more about fear. Darlene forwarded the tip onto the Fulton police, and in March of 2013, the case was officially opened again. Police were shocked to learn how Douglas had fallen through the cracks when he was mentioned so many times in all of the reports.
Mm-hmm.
There was even a witness that came forward on December 28th, 1974, and told police that a friend had told them that they had heard Douglas admit that he was the one that hit Carolee. From the reports, it looked like no one followed up on it.
This is terrible.
Mm-hmm. There was one suspicious note found in the file from the police chief at the time. The note read, quote, "I have not passed this information on to any other members of the Fulton PD so as not to start any rumors or cause any member of this department any problems if there is nothing to this."
Yeah, but you got to check out if there's something to it.
But they didn't. After that, the case file was closed until 2000. In 2000, the cold case was opened again. And then another tip that mentioned Douglas's name was given to police. This time, it indirectly implicated Douglas. This tip was about the businessman's son being involved and everything being kept hush-hush. All of it was super suspicious. The cold case detectives in 2013 went to see Lenny first. And to their surprise, he talked openly about that Halloween night, telling them that he had always wondered about it. He and his brother Douglas had been drinking that night at the airport inn and then had visited their older brother's house and were heading north up to a hunting camp. Lenny's story was one that changed over the years. The one that he tells later is that both boys saw the little girl and that she ran out in front of the car, that her sister, who was holding onto her hand, couldn't control her. This version erases all doubt that they knew that they had hit a little girl that night. But that version didn't come out originally. It only came out years later. When the police interviewed him in 2013, Lenny said that he was just passed out in the back seat and he was jolted awake. Doug told him that they had hit a guardrail, but Lenny thought it sounded more like a deer or a dog. He tells police now that he had always been suspicious of his brother's story, and he tells them that he could show them where Douglas's old 62 Buick Special was. It had been dumped in the back of his sister's property.
And sat there for all this time.
Mm-hmm. Police go to investigate, and under years of rust and rot hidden under branches piled up by children over the decades, they find the tan car. It was twisted and distorted from having sunk into the ground. But the top of the driver's side fender has a dent, and it's the size of a human head. While the car is being found, other officers track down Douglas. And when they show up at his doorstep, he has no idea that they are there to question him about Carolee's death 45 years later.
Oh yeah, he got to just put that in his back pocket and live his life.
Mm-hmm. At least he tried to, I think. He denies remembering anything about Carolee's death.
Liar.
He says he doesn't even remember her as a little girl.
There's no way you wouldn't be haunted by that for your entire life.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you were a complete monster.
And you just let it go. But I don't think he let it go.
No.
His sister calls while the investigators are there to say, "Why are police digging up this car on my property?"
She had no idea.
No, she had no idea. Douglas tells her he can't remember any car that would even be on her property.
Oh, what a liar.
Mm-hmm.
He was a liar when he was 18, and he was a liar 50 years later.
He's still trying to be. The license plate and the VIN number on the car are easily traced back to him. They both belong to the car that he had bought in February of 1968. When he is asked if he was driving that night, Douglas tells police that, quote, "I'm not going to say it is, and I'm not going to say it isn't, because I can't honestly remember." Interestingly, he never denies running over Carolee.
But he didn't admit it either.
No, he wouldn't. Police lay out the facts for him, painting a picture on how all the evidence is showing that he killed Carolee. It's pretty much undeniable. But at this point, Douglas is adamant that he hadn't run over a little girl. Surely he would remember something like that. And he definitely did not remember doing it. It would take another 15 days, another interview, and a meeting with the district attorney's office on April 9th to assure him that he couldn't be prosecuted for the dirtbag turned hero to finally remember and to somewhat confess to his actions. He had previously told the district attorney through tears that, quote, "I don't know what to tell you. I don't remember." But now, 15 days later, his memory had started to come back in pieces, and he turned himself in. One of the officers wrote down his sentences and read them back to him so he could confirm that the statement was accurate. He tells police the same story as Lenny. He tells them that they had been going hunting and admits to drinking about 3 beers that night. Lenny had been drinking too and was in the back seat passed out. In his confession, he says that, quote, "While I drove through the city of Fulton, I heard a thud. It sounded like I hit a dog. I don't know where I hit that thing, but I know I drove past the old Seawright building. I don't remember when I hit that thing, but I know I told the police that I got into an accident about 6:45 p.m. that night. I did not see what I hit. I did not stop. I didn't remember hitting the brakes. I left Fulton. I didn't remember seeing any kids, but I believe in my heart that I hit the little Ashby girl with my car. I did not see her or any other kids. That night I told police I hit a guard post. That did not happen. But I don't know why police never challenged me on this. I wish they did. I would have told the truth. After my time in Vietnam, I forgot all about this information. I did not start thinking about it until Sergeant Lunn and Batstone started to talk to me. I know in my heart that I am 99.9% sure that I hit the little girl with my 1962 Tam Buick Special. I am so sorry. I can't change anything, but I hope this apology will be accepted and I beg forgiveness. I don't know how my car got behind my sister's house, but that was my car, and it was the car that hit the little Ashby girl. Before this night, I did not have any dents in my car. Again, I'm terribly sorry for what happened. I did not see the little Ashby girl. Please forgive me. I did not intentionally hit that little girl. I'm sorry." And that was that. Douglas would face no jail time for Carolee's death. The statute of limitations had long since passed because the police couldn't prove that there was any malicious intent. Douglas was just free to continue his life. When the police asked if he would like to meet with Carolee's remaining family members to apologize, Douglas declined and said he wasn't ready, and maybe later he would do it.
What a coward. You've had 44 years or however long it's been to get that courage.
Yeah, and that later never came.
And the statute of limitations is so frustrating. You know, you just have to write it out and then you're fine.
Yeah.
It's baloney.
Just stay quiet and then you can get away with murder.
Yeah, I don't understand it. Not when it comes to something like that. If you were drunk or not, he still should have been held responsible.
But he never is. After his confession, Douglas reached out to Lenny to tell him that he had confessed. They had not spoken in 20 years, driven apart by their silence over the accident. When Douglas told him that he had confessed, his brother just told them that he should have done it a long time ago. And their long-standing silence resumed after that. In 2014, when the story about the 45-year-old cold case being solved hit the news and became a miniseries, Douglas fled New York State. He couldn't face the community. The publicity was stirring up all of the old feelings for everyone. Carolee's family wasn't totally ready to accept his solo confession. They still believed that there was some kind of cover-up, even though cold case detectives said they couldn't find any evidence of a third person being in the car. They did find witness reports that had alluded to a third party, but they were all hearsay. It was not something that the Ashby family was willing to accept. They believed that they had had experiences with this wealthy man's son and his associates that indicated that he was guilty as well. Police did investigate the claims extensively in 2000 and deny any involvement of a third person. In all the publicly accessible police reports, this particular man's name has been redacted, along with any other identifying information. But that didn't change the Ashby's mind. They didn't believe that Douglas was the only one responsible, and they thought maybe that's perhaps why he wasn't willing to apologize to them. They believed that any decent human being would apologize.
Yeah, especially if you're claiming it was an accident.
Right. The family were still hurting, and Douglas's confession, without a direct apology to them, just fueled their pain further. Darlene claimed that after police released the information of Douglas's confession, that the only contact they ever had with him was a phone call to one of her sons, a few weeks after his confession. In the telephone call, Douglas had told their son that, quote, "I'm not sure I did it."
I'm not sure I did it now?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, he's a dirtbag. First of all, I was angry when you first started reading his quote when he was referring to it as the thing. Like, excuse me, sir.
That's a little girl.
Yeah. Then he confesses, won't see the family, won't say sorry, and now he's changing his mind. Actually, maybe I didn't. You slimy little coward.
Police were quite certain that he had done it, but the Ashby family took all this to mean that maybe he hadn't been the only one and that he was being forced to cover up for someone else.
Who? Who was forcing him?
This prominent businessman that's name's redacted in all of the reports.
Ugh. Then why wouldn't they have made him take the fall years ago and have it a done case?
Exactly.
You're not going to wait.
It doesn't make any sense.
No.
This dirtbag did it, and he couldn't stand up to what he had done. With everything being stirred up, Douglas moved to Maine with his sons for a time, until he had a falling out with them. Doug Jr. said that out of the blue, his father called him to say that he had made a mistake. His son believed that his father meant the confession, not the accident, or keeping it a secret.
Yeah.
And that just fueled the wedge even further between them.
Yeah, it would.
Doug Jr. could never understand why his father kept quiet all those years, while another family continued to suffer. The knowledge of his father's past widened the wedge between them. He was a hypocrite that had always held them to such a high standard. His other sons also believed that the accident played a large part in their relationship with their father, but they had hoped that with the secret out in the open, that their relationship would now improve. But Douglas would never talk about it again after his April 17th confession. When someone would bring up anything remotely close to the accident, he would just leave the room. It seemed like to him the matter had been dealt with. But some feel that it wasn't fully dealt with until June 1st, 2018, when fate completed the circle.
Yeah, it's pretty ironic.
Uh-huh.
How he ended up dying, right down to his shoe flying across the field.
Yeah. And being hit by a woman named Carol.
Yeah.
After Douglas's death, no connection could be made between Carol and himself.
Really?
Nope.
I've been waiting this whole time for you to tell me that that was one of the cousins or sister, that she was related somehow.
No. He had been a completely random stranger that she had hit during a manic episode.
So this wasn't even just perfect just comeuppance.
No. It was the
What?
universe.
It was Babe Ruth.
Yeah, maybe.
No way.
Isn't that ironic?
I always say there's no coincidences, so this is wild to me.
So wild.
Maybe it was the universe's way of getting even.
It was fate's balance, right?
Yes.
For justice?
It was an eye for an eye.
It does seem like that.
It does. Not to justify what either of them did, but this is wild.
How do you have these two completely random instances connect in this way?
Yes, because you said there was 200 people at that stadium, and he's the one person that she hit.
Yeah. And a lot of people's statements talk about how she would swerve and miss other people, and for him, she just beelined it.
Yeah.
Carol was charged with aggravated assault and manslaughter, and she waived her right to a jury trial. She was held on a $500,000 bail while the court arranged for a mental health evaluation. Carol was found not criminally responsible on April 2nd, 2019. The two psychologists that examined her agreed that she had suffered from a manic episode with delusions at the time of the crash and did not have the ability to know what she was doing was wrong at the time. Both doctors agreed, even though they were technically on opposite sides of the case, that Carol had been taking her lithium faithfully in the days leading up to the hit and run, but that she had also been consuming large amounts of coffee and Red Bulls, and that had caused her to pass the lithium from her system at a much higher rate than usual, resulting in almost negligible levels in her bloodstream to help her control her mania.
Wow. But even with all of that, she took responsibility.
She did.
I'm not excusing either of them, but she has a more plausible excuse than he did.
And she expresses remorse, and she recognizes the far-reaching effects. It wasn't just Douglas's family that was hurt. She becomes quite upset about the children that had to watch that happen.
Absolutely. And this is from a mental illness that is beyond her control, where Douglas chose to drink alcohol and chose to get behind the wheel.
Mm-hmm. And until his death, refused to even fully admit that he recognized that it was a little girl that he hit.
And to even say sorry. Wow.
Carol was remanded to Riverview Psychiatric Center in Augusta for treatment. Up until 4 years ago, she was still a patient there. In an interview, she said that, quote, she has a vague memory of wanting to test her brakes and heading to Goodall Park. She remembers hitting the fence, but she said she has no memory of hitting him. Quote, and so she lives with her knowledge of what she did by reminding herself that it wasn't what she intended to do. In the same way people involved in other kinds of accidents learn to live with themselves.
Mhm.
People have fatal accidents of drinking and driving. They have fatal accidents texting and driving. They have fatal accidents running red lights and going through stop signs. The accidents that change your life forever happen in the blink of an eye. And as Carol told me, that was the reporter that made this quote, "What happened to me can happen to anyone." She later expressed her remorse for what had happened and how it had affected everyone involved. When the reporter brought up the idea that fate had directed her to extract justice for Carolee's unpunished murder, it actually upset her because it then negated her rationale that it had all just been a random accident.
Yeah, I can see that, but I agree that that's what it was.
It's hard not to believe that.
True. But it would be so hard to live with something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But that was out of her control. It did happen. It'd be no different than if we were driving and suddenly had a heart attack and you cause a terrible accident.
Right.
Yeah. But when you're making those choices like drinking or texting or doing those types of things that are negligent, that cause harm, you do need to be held responsible. That's a different ball game than what was happening with Carol.
It's so crazy, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This same reporter arranged for a meeting between Darlene, Carolee's sister, and Douglas III, Douglas's grandson, who wanted to formally apologize on behalf of his grandfather.
That's really beautiful. That touches my heart that he did that. He took the time to meet with her.
Oh, yeah, when his grandfather couldn't.
Yes.
Yeah. And he was just a teenager at the time.
Wow.
He could see the hurt that he could mend or at least help.
Right. And he knew what kind of person his grandfather was.
Mm-hmm. After appearing on camera together, Darlene said that, quote, "That's all my parents ever wanted, was someone to say that they were sorry to put some worth to her life." Darlene also gave this statement after hearing what happened to Douglas, saying, quote, "It feels like it made full circle. Now I am relieved. I truly am. The same thing that happened to my sister happened to him. It made a complete circle. She felt like it had been poetic justice." And those are the entwined cases of two unintending dirtbags, the delusional Carol Sharrow and the cowardly and secretive Douglas Parkhurst, that some believe fate brought together to balance the scales of justice.
100%.
Isn't that a crazy case?
It is.
Yeah.
It's so sad. I just have like a pit in my stomach. This was all so avoidable.
And random and so crazy.
Wow. I've not heard that case before, Melissa.
I do think, though, that Douglas was the bigger dirtbag. Because from the crime scene photos and how far Carolee's body traveled, it seemed like she was on the windshield of his car for some time.
Oh my goodness.
I don't think there's any way for him not to have known that he hit a little girl. I think she would have been front and center for him. Just where her head hit and how far she traveled, I think she was carried on top of the car for some time. And Lenny's statement afterwards kind of alludes to that fact, saying that, no, we both knew it was a little girl.
Yeah, there's no way. And even if you did think, oh, maybe I hit a dog or something like that, the news hit the town. Police were asking you, and you chose to hide it and not say, oh, I think I hit a dog. You said, I hit a guardrail.
Mm-hmm.
Or you didn't say, oh, I'm not sure what I hit. I did hit something.
Yeah, here's my car.
Right. No, you took the car and it was hidden.
Yeah.
And then you're involving your sister, who has no part in this, by hiding basically a murder weapon on her property.
Yep. And then he uses the excuse of being a war vet as a reason for all of his nightmares and his bad behavior and just buries it under all that, when really he was a cook. I'm not denying that a cook could see some action, but really his nightmares started before he went to Vietnam.
Yeah. It's clear by the story that you told about him that he just was not willing to take responsibility and just wanted to sweep it under the rug.
Which is such a dirtbag thing to do.
It really is. Because I think, okay, he was a teenager. If he had just fessed up to it, he probably would have had some type of punishment, but not enough where he would have spent the rest of his life in prison. He probably would have served his time and been able to move forward with it, giving that family some type of answer to what happened to their daughter.
Right. And allowing himself to actually have closure and healing as well.
Yes, they all would have felt better for decades.
Mm-hmm. Listeners, telling the truth is always the answer.
That's true. And here's something else that is true. We will be back next week when I bring you another case.
Until then,
See ya.
bye.
We're in business, baby. It's a mystery.
Although, this is funny. I went and had my eyes checked yesterday. Apparently, I am reverse aging. My eyesight is getting better.
What?
I know.
Benjamin Button.
I'm learning. I'm breaking out more and more in my sentences, but they're still super long. Exactly. I don't want to say exactly again because I say it all the time. That's right. Nope. Say that all the time too.
That's not going in the
blooper.
That's not going in the bloopers. Okay, it's not funny.
It is actually though.
I've had so many people ask me, "What's that sound?" Like, it's a rewind. But younger generations don't know what a rewind button sounds like. Don't. Okay. Oh dear, it's gonna be a day.
Another Sound Off Media Company podcast.